Hello everyone, welcome to another stream of Moby Dick. We are nearly at the end of it. We've only got that far to go. Just another 3 chapters, about 30 pages. 5 chapters. I'm not sure if I'm going to get the whole rest of it done tonight. But we're not far away. That's all we've got to go. And it's exciting. It's very exciting. So yeah, we'll read the last little bit either this week and in the next podcast of the end of Moby Dick. Don't forget, you can watch the whole thing, listen to me reading the whole of Moby Dick on my YouTube channel. Sometimes I've been live on other platforms, sometimes I've just been here. Either way, you can listen to the whole thing. Also, you can listen to me reading a few other books at the moment. For example, I'm also reading Silas Marner by George Eliot. There, Silas Marner by George Eliot. And a few others as well. I can read full books that are out of copyright. So if they're written by somebody who died more than 75 years ago, I can read them, which means I can read Moby Dick. So you might want to suggest some more books for me to read when I'm done with this. Anyway, on we go. Chapter 130, The Hat. And now that the proper time and place, after so long and wide a preliminary cruise, Ahab, all other whaling writers swept, seemed to have chased his foe into an ocean fold, to lay him the more securely there, that he found himself hard by the very latitude and longitude where his tormenting wound had been inflicted, now that a vessel had been spoken which, on the very day preceding, had actually encountered Moby Dick, and now that all his successive meetings with various ships contrastingly concurred to show the demoniac indifference with which the white whale tore his hunters, whether sinning or sinned against, now it was that there lurked a something in the old man's eyes, which was hardly insufferable for fools' souls to see. As the unsetting polar star, which through the livelong Arctic 6 months' night sustains its piercing, steady central gaze, so Ahab's purpose now fixedly gleamed down upon the constant midnight of the gloomy crew. It domineered above them so, that all their bodings, doubts, misgivings, fears were fain to hide beneath their souls, and not sprout forth a single spear or leaf. In this foreshadowing interval, too, all humour, forced or natural, vanished. Stubb no more strove to raise a smile. Starbuck no more strove to check one. Alike joy and sorrow, hope and fear seemed ground to fine dust and powdered for the time in that clamped mortar of Ahab's iron soul. Like machines, they dumbly moved about the deck, ever conscious that the old man's despot eye was on them. But did you deeply scan him in his more secret confidential hours, when he thought no glance but one was on him, then you would have seen that even as Ahab's eyes so awed the crew's, the inscrutable Parsee's glance awed his, or somehow, at least, in some wild way, it at times affected it. Such an added, gliding strangeness began to invest the thin Fedallah now, such ceaseless shuddering shook him, that the men looked dubious at him, half uncertain, as it seemed, whether indeed he were mere mortal substance, or else a tremulous shadow cast upon the deck by some unseen being's body. And that shadow was always hanging there, for not by night even had Fedallah ever certainly been known to slumber or go below. He would stand still for hours, but never sat or leaned. His one but wondrous eye would plainly say, "We two watchmen never rest." Nor at any time, by night or day, could the mariners now step upon the deck unless Ahab was before them, either standing in his pivot hole, or exactly pacing the planks between two undeviating limits, the mainmast and the mizzen, or else they saw him standing in his cabin scuttle, his living foot advancing upon the deck as if to step, His hat slouched heavily over his eyes, so that however motionless he stood, however the days and nights were added on, that he had not swung in his hammock, yet hidden beneath that slouching hat, they could never tell unerringly whether, for all this, his eyes were really closed at times, or whether he was still intently scanning them. No matter. Though he stood so in the scuttle for a whole hour on the stretch, and the unheeded night damp gathered in beads of dew upon that stone-carved coat and hat. The clothes, hello, Senator, the clothes that the night had wet, the next day's sunshine dried upon him, and so day after day and night after night he went no more beneath the planks, whatever he wanted from the cabin, that thing he sent for. He ate in the same open air, that is, his two only meals, breakfast and dinner. Supper he never touched, nor reaped his beard, which darkly grew all gnarled, as unearthed roots of trees blown over, which still grow idly on at naked base, though perished in the upper verdure. And though his whole life was now become one watch on deck, and though the Parsee's mystic watch was without intermission as his own, yet these two never seemed to speak, one man to the other, unless at long intervals some passing unmomentous matter made it necessary. Though such a potent spell seemed secretly to join the twain, openly, and to the awestruck crew they seemed pole-like asunder. If by day they chanced to speak one word, by night dumb men were both, so far as concerned the slightest verbal interchange. At times, for longest hours, without a single hail, they stood far parted in the starlight, Ahab in his scuttle, the Parsee by the mainmast, but still fixedly gazing upon each other, as if in the Parsee Ahab saw his forth-thrown shadow, in Ahab the Parsee his abandoned substance. Let's have a little drink, a little sip of water. It's thirsty stuff reading. There's very much a portentous feeling of what's to come, isn't there? And yet, somehow did Ahab, in his own proper self, as daily, hourly, and every instant, commandingly reveal to his subordinates, Ahab seemed an independent lord, the Parsee but his slave. Still again, both seemed yoked together, and an unseen tyrant driving them, the lean shade sliding the solid rib. For be this Parsee what he may, all rib and keel was solid Ahab. At the first faintest glimmering of the dawn, his iron voice was heard from aft, "Man the mastheads!" And all through the day, till after sunset and after twilight, the same voice every hour at the striking of the helmsman's bell was heard. "What do you see? Sharp! Sharp!" Are you sure this is myself? Yes. But when 3 or 4 days had slided by, after meeting the children seeking Rachel, no spout had yet been seen. The monomaniac old man seemed distrustful of his crew's fidelity, at least of nearly all except the pagan harpooners. He seemed to doubt even whether Stubb and Flask might not willingly overlook the sight he sought. But if these suspicions were really his, he sagaciously refrained from verbally expressing them, though however his actions might seem to hint them. "I will have the first sight of the whale myself," he said. "I, Ahab, must have the doubloon." And with his own hands he rigged a nest of basketed bowlines, and sending a hand aloft with a small sheafed block to secure to the mainmast head, he received 2 ends of the downward reeved rope, and attaching one to his basket, prepared a pin for the other end in order to fasten it at the rail. This done, with that end yet in his hand, and standing beside the pin, he looked round upon his crew, sweeping from one to another, pausing his glance long upon Daggoo, Kekeg, Tashtigo, but shunning Fedallah, and then settling his firm relying eye upon his chief mate, said, "Take the rope, sir. I give it into thy hands, Starbuck." Then arranging his person in the basket, he gave the word for them to hoist him to his perch, Starbuck being the one who secured the rope last, and afterwards stood near it. And thus, with one hand clinging round the royal mast, Ahab gazed abroad upon the sea for miles and miles, ahead, astern, this side and that, within the wide expanded circle commanded at so great a height. When in working with his hands at some lofty, almost isolated place in the rigging, which chances to afford no foothold, the sailor at sea is hoisted up to that spot and sustained there by the rope. Under these circumstances, its fastened end on deck is always given in strict charge to some one man who has the special watch of it. Because in such a wilderness of running rigging, whose various different relations aloft cannot always be infallibly discerned by what is seen of them at the deck, and when the deckhands of these ropes are being every few minutes cast down from the fastenings, it would be but a natural fatality if, unprovided with a constant watchman, the hoisted sailor should by some carelessness of the crew be cast adrift and fall off swooping to the sea. So Ahab's proceedings in this matter were not unusual. The only strange thing about them seemed to be that Starbuck, almost the one only man who had ever ventured to oppose him with anything in the slightest degree approaching to decision, one of those two whose faithfulness on the lookout he had seemed to doubt somewhat, it was strange that this was the very man he should, 20 pages, that he should select for his watchman, freely giving his whole life into such an otherwise distrusted person's hands. Now, the first time Ahab was perched aloft, ere he had been there 10 minutes, one of those red-billed savage seahawks which so often fly incommodiously close round the manned mastheads of whalemen in these latitudes, one of those birds came wheeling and screaming round his head in a maze of untrackably swift circlings. Then it darted 1,000 feet straight up into the air, then spiralized downwards and went eddying again round his head. With his gaze fixed upon the dim, distant horizon, Ahab seemed not to mark this wild bird, nor indeed would anyone else have marked it much, it being so uncommon circumstance. Only now, almost the least heedful eye seemed to see some sort of cunning meaning in almost every sight. Your hat, sir! Suddenly cried the Sicilian seaman, who, being posted at the mizzen masthead, stood directly behind Ahab, though somewhat lower than his level, and with a deep gulf of air dividing them. But already the sable wing was before the old man's eyes, the long hooked bill at his head. With a scream, the black hawk darted away with his prize. An eagle flew thrice round Tarquin's head, removing his cap to replace it, and thereupon Tanaquil, his wife, declared that Tarquin would be king of Rome. But only by the replacing of the cap was that omen accounted good. Ahab's hat was never restored. The wild hawk flew on and on with it, far in advance of the prow, and at last disappeared, while from the point of that disappearance a minute black spot was dimly discerned, falling from that vast height into the sea. End of chapter. Let's have another little sip before we read the next chapter. It's all full of signs. Yes, the Romans did place great importance on their birds and their signs, their crows and whatnot. Chapter 131, the Pequod meets the Delight. The intense Pequod sailed on, the rolling waves and days went by, the lifebuoy coffin was still lightly swung, and another ship, most miserably misnamed the Delight, was descried. As she drew nigh, all eyes were fixed upon her broad beams, called shears, which in some whaling ships cross the quarter-deck at the height of 8 or 9 feet, serving to carry the spare unregged or disabled boats. Dark rum. Could be dark rum in my flask. Upon the strangest shears were beheld the shattered white ribs and some few splintered planks of what had once been a whaleboat. But you now saw through this wreck as plainly as you see through the peeled, half unhinged, and bleaching skeleton of a horse. Hast seen the white whale? Look, replied the hollow-cheeked captain from his taffrail, and with his trumpet he pointed to the wreck. Hast killed him? The harpoon is not yet forged that will ever do that, answered the other, sadly glancing upon a rounded hammock on the deck, whose gathered sides some noiseless sailors were busy in sewing together. Not forged! And snatching Pratt's levelled iron from the crotch, Ahab held it out, exclaiming, Look ye, Nantucketer, here in this hand I hold his death. Tempered in blood, and tempered by lightning are these barbs, and I swear to temper them triply in that hot place behind the fin, where the white whale most feels his accursed life. Then God keep thee, old man, seest thou that? Pointing to the hammock. I bury but one of 5 stout men who were alive only yesterday, but were dead ere night. Only that one I bury, the rest were buried before they died. You sail upon their tomb. Then turning to his crew, Are you ready there? Place the plank then on the rail and lift the body. So then, O God, advancing towards the hammock with uplifted hands, may the resurrection and the life. Brace forward! Up helm! Cried Ahab like lightning to his men. But the suddenly started Pequod was not quick enough to escape the sound of the splash that the corpse soon made as it struck the sea. Not so quick, indeed, but that some of the flying bubbles might have sprinkled our hull with their ghostly baptism. As Ahab now glided from the dejected Delight, the strange lifebuoy hanging at the Pequod's stern came into a conspicuous relief. Ha! Yonder, look yonder, man, cried a foreboding voice in her wake. In vain, O ye strangers, ye fly our sad burial, ye but turn as your taffrail to show us your coffin. End of chapter again. So we've only got another 3 chapters. Shall we finish? What do you think? Shall we finish tonight? We've got another 26 pages. I think we might. Let's have another little sip before we have chapter 132. Can't be long. Still no Moby Dick to be seen. It's amazing. Chapter 132, The Symphony. It was a clear, steel blue day. The firmaments of air and sea were hardly separable in that all-pervading azure. Only the pensive air was transparently pure and soft, with a woman's look, and the robust and manlike sea heaved with long, strong, lingering swells as Samson's chest in his sleep. Hither and thither, on high, glided the snow-white wings of small, unspeckled birds. These were the gentle thoughts of the feminine air. But to and fro in the deeps, far down in the bottomless blue, rushed mighty leviathans, swordfish, and sharks, and these were the strong, troubled, murderous thinkings of the masculine sea. But though thus contrasting within, the contrast was only in shades and shadows without. Those two seemed one. It was only in the sex, as it were, that distinguished them. Aloft, like a royal czar and king, the sun seemed giving this gentle air to this bold and rolling sea, even as bride to groom. And at the girdling line of the horizon, a soft and tremulous motion, most seen here at the equator, denoted the fond, throbbing trust, the loving arms with which the poor bride gave her bosom away. Tied up and twisted, gnarled and knotted with wrinkles, haggardly firm and unyielding, his eyes glowing like coals that still glow in the ashes of ruin, untottering Ahab stood forth in the clearness of the morn, lifting his splintered helmet to a brow to the fair girl's forehead of heaven. O immortal infancy and innocency of the azure! Invisible winged creatures that frolic all round us, sweet childhood of air and sea, how oblivious were ye of old Ahab's close-coiled woe! But so have I seen little Miriam and Martha, laughing-eyed elves, heedlessly gambol around their old sire, sporting with the circle of singed locks which grew on the marge of that burnt-out crater of his brain. Slowly crossing the deck from the scuttle, Ahab leaned over the side and watched how his shadow in the water sank and sank to his gaze, the more and the more that he strove to pierce the profundity. But the lovely aromas in that enchanted air did at last seem to dispel, for a moment, the cantankerous thing in his soul. That glad, happy sir, that winsome sky did at last stoke and caress him. The stepmother world so long cruel, forbidding, now threw affectionate arms round his stubborn neck, and did seem to joyously sob over him, as if over one that, however wilful and erring, she could yet find it in her heart to save and to bless. From beneath his slouched hat, Ahab dropped a tear into the sea, nor did all the Pacific contain such wealth as that one wee drop. Starbuck saw the old man, saw him, how he heavily leaned over the side, and he seemed to hear in his own true heart the measureless sobbing that stole out of the centre of the serenity around. Careful not to touch him or be noticed by him, he yet drew near to him and stood there. Ahab turned. "Starbuck!" "Sir." "Oh, Starbuck! It is a mild, mild wind and a mild-looking sky. On such a day, very much such a sweetness as this, I struck my first whale, a boy harpooner of 18, 40 years ago. 40 years of continual whaling, 40 years of privation and peril in storm time, 40 years on the pitiless sea. For 40 years has Ahab forsaken the peaceful land, for 40 years to make war on the horrors of the deep. Aye, and yes, Starbuck, out of those 40 years, I have spent 3 ashore. When I think of this life I have led, the desolation of solitude it has been, the masoned walled town of a captain's exclusiveness, which admits but small entrance to any sympathy from the green country without. Oh, weariness, heaviness, Guinea Coast slavery of solitary command. When I think of all this, only half suspected, not so keenly known to me before, and how for 40 years I have fed upon dry salted fare, fit embalm of the dry nourishment of my soul, when the poorest landsman has had fresh fruit to his daily hand, and broken the world's fresh bread to my mouldy crusts, away, whole oceans away from that young girl wife I wedded past 50, and sailed for Cape Horn the next day, leaving but one dent in my marriage pillow. Wife? Wife? Rather a widow with her husband alive. I widowed that poor girl when I married her. Starbuck, and then the madness, the frenzy, the boiling blood, and the smoking brow with which, for 1,000 lowerings, old Ahab has furiously, foamingly chased his prey. More a demon than a man. Aye, what a 40 years fool, old fool has old Ahab been. Why this strife of the chase? Why weary and palsy the arm at the oar, and the iron, and the lance? How the richer or better is Ahab now? Behold, O Starbuck, it is not hard that with this weary load I bear. One poor leg should have been snatched from under me. Here, brush this old hair aside, it blinds me that I seem to weep. Locks so grey did never grow but from some ashes. But do I look very old? So very, very old, Starbuck? I feel deadly faint, bowed and humped, as though I were Adam staggering beneath the piled centuries since paradise. God, 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 crack my heart, stave my brain, mockery, mockery, bitter, biting mockery of grey hairs. Have I lived enough joy to wear ye, and seem and feel thus intolerably old? Close, stand close to me, Starbuck. Let me look into a human eye. It is better than to gaze into sea or sky, better than to gaze upon God. by the green land, by the bright hearthstone. This is the magic glass, man. I see my wife and my child in thine eye. No, no, stay on board, lower not when I do. When branded Ahab gives chase to Moby Dick, that hazard shall not be thine. No, no, not with the faraway home I see in that eye. Oh, my captain, noble soul, grand old heart after all. Why should anyone give chase to that hated fish? Away with me! Let us fly these deadly waters, let us home. Wife and child too are Starbuck's, wife and child of his brotherly, sisterly, playfellow youth. Even as thine, sir, are the wife and child of thy loving, longing, paternal old age. Away, let us away. This instant, let me alter the course. How cheerily, how hilariously, oh my captain, would we bowl on our way to see old Nantucket again? I think, sir, they have such mild blue days, even as this in Nantucket. They have, they have. I have seen them some summer days in the morning. About this time, yes, it is his noon nap now. The boy vivaciously wakes, sits up in the bed, and his mother tells him of me, of cannibal old me, how I am abroad upon the deep, but will come yet back to dance him again. 'Tis my Mary herself. She promised that boy every morning should be carried to the hill to catch the first glimpse of his father's sail. Yes, yes, no more. It is done. We head for Nantucket. Come, my captain, study out the course and let us away. See the boy's face from the window, the boy's hand on the hill. But Ahab's gaze was averted. Like a blighted fruit tree, he shook and cast his last cindered apple to the soil. What is it? What nameless, inscrutable, unearthly thing it is? What cozening, hidden lord and master and cruel, remorseless emperor commands me, that against all natural lovings and longings I so keep pushing and crowding and jamming myself on all the time, recklessly making me ready to do what is my own proper, natural heart? I durst not so much as dare. Is Ahab, is it I, God, or who, that lifts this arm? But if the great sun move not of himself, but is an errand boy in heaven, nor one single star can revolve, but by some invisible power, how then can this one small heart beat, this one small brain think thoughts, unless God does that beating, does that thinking, does that living, and not I? By heaven, man, we are turned round and round in this world, like yonder windlass, and fate is the handspike, and all the time, lo, that smiling sky and his unsounded sea. Look, see yon albacore. Who put him into chase and fang that flying fish? Where do murderers go, man? Who's to doom when the judge himself is dragged to the bar? But it is a mild, mild wind and a mild looking sky, and the air smells now as if it blew from a faraway meadow. They have been making hay somewhere under the slopes of the Andes. Starbuck and all the Moors are sleeping among the new mown hay. Sleeping? Aye, toil we how we may. We all sleep at last on the field. Sleep, aye, and rust amid greenness, as last year's scythes flung down and left in half-cut swathes Starbuck. But blanched to a corpse's hue with despair, the mate had stolen away. Ahab crossed the deck to gaze over the other side, but stared at two reflected, fixed eyes in the water there. Fadala was motionlessly leaning over the same rail. End of chapter. Cruel for Ahab to be thinking and talking like that. And Starbuck hoped to be able to go. It's not to be. Not to be. So we've got three more chapters. The chase the first day, the chase the second day, and the chase the third day. And we've got 24 pages to go. So, shall we? 23 pages. Shall we come back to this for one more session, just the last 3 chapters? I think I might, I think we might leave the last 3 for another night or another day. Please explain the analogies. What, all of them? I mean, there's a lot. Yeah, so clearly Ahab is being driven on by something that he doesn't understand, something he doesn't know, whether it's himself, whether it's God, whether it's nature. Don't know, but he's torn away from what all other men want to go back to. A wife and son, he's being torn away from that to chase the whale. He doesn't know why, he doesn't understand it. But there's nothing he can do about it. I don't know what you'd call that. An obsession, a madness. Aye, Captain. Captain, my Captain. Yeah, I think we'll leave the final 3 chapters for another time. And that'll be that. So don't forget to suggest a new book, perhaps, for when we've finished reading Moby Dick. Right, I'm going to, instead of doing it live, I'm going to record another bit of Silas Marner, another chapter or so of Silas Marner. So I'll record that and post it here on YouTube at some point. And as I said before, don't forget you can watch all the previous chapters of Moby Dick here on YouTube. So that'll do. I will stop there after half an hour. Is the book truly about a whale or something else? Well, we still haven't met the whale. After all this time, is it really about a whale? No, definitely not. It's about something else for sure. Maybe we'll find out what in the final 3 chapters, the final part of my epic recording of Moby Dick. That'll do then. So I will see you for the next few chapters, final few chapters next time, and I might see you for a bit of Silas Marner as well. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and give me a thumbs up as well. Give me a like and a subscribe, and leave a comment if you want as well. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.